COVID caution. New rules for children as authorities warn that infection numbers are set to peak in the coming days. Virtual warfare. Taiwan wraps up the first phase of one of its largest military drills, but we found out how the war in Ukraine is affecting strategy. The dilemma down under. Why China is on the ballot in the Australian elections. And what's all the buzz? On World Bee Day, we visit a school in Taiwan that's taking lessons from the hive. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Experts say Taiwan is nearing the peak of its COVID-19 outbreak. On Friday, the country recorded nearly 86,000 new cases. As case numbers rise, the government is working to protect one group that's particularly at risk: small children. John Van Trieste has this report.
At least 7 children are now in intensive care due to COVID. One of them, a 4-year-old, diagnosed with encephalitis, or inflammation of the brain. The case has prompted new guidelines for getting children with COVID emergency care. Parents are being told to go straight to the hospital if their children have convulsions, white or blue lips, spots on the skin, difficulty breathing, or a blood oxygen concentration of less than 94%.
年纪在3岁到4岁左右至5岁以下幼儿的话，要特别注意这些症状，要注意是不是有可能是并发脑炎的一个前驱症状。
There are other new guidelines too, and it's good news for people who've recovered from COVID.
刚感染过而且解除隔离的人他在短期内是不会再有这个再次感染的这样的一个可能性。曾确诊个案距离当次确诊发病日3个月内呢，如果再次有接触到确诊个案的话是不需要再被匡列为接触者的。
With new cases expected to peak in the coming days, officials are repeating calls for people to get vaccinated.
好的追加剂疫苗接种者较未接种者在染疫后可以降低83%的死亡率。
Currently, the death rate is rising along with the surge in infections. Authorities hope the vaccination drive will help keep fatal cases to a minimum. Patrick Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Today marks the start of President Tsai Ing-wen's 6th year in office, and annual polls show that the popularity of Taiwan's leader has dropped as the country grapples with its worst outbreak of COVID-19. The Taiwanese Public Opinion Foundation released its latest poll on Friday, showing the number of people approving of Tsai fell by 5 percentage points from March to 46.2%. It also found that almost half of the more than 1,000 people surveyed, 49.2%, don't believe Tsai's government was well prepared for Taiwan's current COVID wave. The first stage of Taiwan's large-scale Hangguang military exercises wraps up on Friday. The exercises were first conducted in 1984 and are designed to prepare the armed forces for an attack from China. The first part of this year's exercises featured a tabletop war game instead of the usual computer simulations, allowing generals to brainstorm strategies face-to-face. The second stage, featuring live-fire drills held around the country, is scheduled for July. For more on the Hangguang exercises and lessons Taiwan's military is drawing from the war in Ukraine, our reporter Jaime Elcon spoke to Zheng Yisuo, director of the Cybersecurity Division at Taiwan's state-run Institute for National Defense and Security Research, or INDSR. He started by asking him about the changes made this year.
This year, what's new is that it becomes to be represented presented in tabletop form while in graphic form, so that people have a visual, people can see the visual presentation, so that they can grapple with the development of the wargaming and the scenarios with more like a 3D, three-dimensional image. Officers, they can try to have a real sense about what might it be when you have the real-time intelligence.
Can you talk about how the war in Ukraine has either shifted or has led policymakers and military officials in Taiwan to kind of adjust their strategy, given that their smaller Ukraine is battling a much bigger Russia?
The MND in Taiwan has been stressing the significance of asymmetric warfare for years, but the war in Ukraine has been kind of the real test regarding this war fighting concept. At the strategic level, it is asymmetric war fighting concept that is at work. So, but there's still a lot of to be tested because in reality check, Taiwan is not Ukraine, and there's a huge difference between the battlefield environment between Taiwan and Ukraine.
What is the biggest thing that Taiwan is learning from the war in Ukraine?
Well, resilience matters, and the resilience in each and every domain cannot be built overnight. It takes Ukraine and their friends, NATO members, particularly the United States, almost a decade to build, to train, to educate, to equip their forces into one that is capable of asymmetric war fighting. That is something we have learned, and definitely the takeaways for Taiwan.
US President Joe Biden has embarked on his first tour of Asia since taking office. Biden is due to arrive in South Korea later on Friday to meet with newly elected President Yoon Suk-yeol and tour a semiconductor plant owned by electronics giant Samsung. The second leg of the 6-day trip will bring Biden to Tokyo to meet with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida. He will also meet with fellow leaders of the Quad, a regional security forum that includes Australia and India. The trip is expected to focus on strengthening Washington's alliances in the region and addressing trade and supply chain issues. To discuss the agenda for Biden's trip to Asia, I spoke to Sean King, Senior Vice President of Park Securities and former Asia advisor with the US government. I began by asking about speculation over a possible missile test by North Korea during the trip and warnings from the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan against action from Pyongyang.
I think Jake Sullivan is giving Kim Jong-un reason to really think through any test before he undertakes it. But were there a nuclear test and or ICBM test when President Biden's in the region, or even when he's not, I could see some kind of rotation of U.S. strategic assets in South Korea, be it aircraft carrier, maybe a B-2 bomber, overflight. Anything more than that, I don't think we're going to do anything too drastic in relation to a single test. But either way, I do expect U.S.-South Korea military exercises to go back to their strength before President Trump canceled and suspended them following his first meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in 2018.
Biden is also expected to seek alignment with South Korea and Japan on Taiwan. Now, Japan has voiced strong support for Taiwan's security, but how about South Korea?
Well, this trip is not about Taiwan per se, although I do think it will come up. South Korea is a little more prickly when it comes to Taiwan than Japan is, because South Korea takes less of an Asia-wide security view than Japan does. It tends to be more focused on specifically Korean issues. And when Seoul and Taipei broke diplomatic relations in 1992, it was handled very badly. So I think South Korea will pay lip service to stability in the Taiwan Strait, peace, democracy. I don't think they would ever really get involved in any contingency on Taiwan. For that matter, I don't expect Japan to actually fight in Taiwan, but I do think that they would support U.S. troops in Japan as they do anything they feel they have to on Taiwan. But South Korea will definitely keep a distance from anything on Taiwan.
You say that the trip is not about Taiwan, but my understanding is that it's about building the US-led alliance in Asia and to send the message to China not to try a Ukraine either on Taiwan or in the region.
Well, the US alliance network in Asia is bilateral in nature, hub and spoke, not collective alliance like NATO in Europe. I don't think Beijing is on the cusp of any Taiwan invasion anyway. I didn't think that before Russia invaded Ukraine. I don't think it now. Whatever the case, I think what's happened in Ukraine has bought Taiwan some time because Beijing looks at Moscow's mistakes and maybe thinks it needs to be more careful if it were to try anything on Taiwan. But I don't consider an invasion of Taiwan imminent. And again, Taiwan will be discussed, but it will not be the focal point of this trip.
Australia heads to the polls on Saturday, with Prime Minister Scott Morrison and his coalition government facing off against the main opposition Labour Party and its leader Anthony Albanese. The country's poor relations with China have been a big issue during the campaign, as Louise Watt reports.
The South Pacific, the focus of an emerging power struggle between Australia and China. In April, the Solomon Islands agreed a security pact with China. Details remain unknown, but it has fueled fears that Beijing could gain a military foothold in what Canberra considers its backyard. Last week, Australia's Defence Minister said that a Chinese intelligence-gathering vessel was spotted off Western Australia.
I think it is an aggressive act, and I think particularly because it has come so far south.
China's presence in the South Pacific has become a sore point for Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison. And he heads into elections Saturday with accusations that he hasn't done enough to stop Beijing increasing its influence in the region.
That raises a lot of security concern in Australia, of course, and especially with Solomon Islands occupying a key position in the sea lanes of communication connecting Australia to the US. In that sense, the foundation of the Australia-US alliance, which has been the cornerstone of Australian security since the end of World War II, is now under an unprecedented challenge, potentially.
Morrison's main challenger, the Labour Party's Anthony Albanese, has accused the Prime Minister of dropping the ball in the South Pacific and says he will better engage with Australia's partners there.
So Labor is essentially saying we can deliver the same policies on China, but we can do it with less collateral diplomatic damage than we've had.
China is the biggest foreign policy issue in this election. Relations with the Asian giant have worsened since Chinese President Xi Jinping and the current Australian coalition government came to power in 2013. They plummeted further in 2020 after Australia called for an investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Beijing blames Australia for the tensions and has slapped tariffs on Australian products like coal, beef and wine. The two Australian sides have both said there's room to improve the country's relationship with China, and there's little difference in terms of foreign policy and how they might handle getting tariffs lifted.
There is a view that China was the first actor to impose significant economic sanctions against Australia rather than the other way around. So if any party is going to make the first move to make a goodwill gesture, it will have to be China. So the ball is in Beijing's court.
Polling on Wednesday showed the election had become too close to call. The biggest issues for voters are domestic ones, particularly a steep rise in the cost of living. But whichever party wins the vote, dealing with China is going to be a crucial issue. Asnaya Zhou and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up, once a symbol of gangsters, but now a popular art form. We have the story of one of Taiwan's top tattoo masters. More after the break.
December and January is eel season here in Taiwan. So these little towns here pop up when the baby eels are caught. So he's going in and we're going to take a look at how he does this. The waves are a little big today. Oh, Jesus Christ. Let's go take a look and see if we caught any. Oh, there's one. 哇，很难抓，很难抓。哇，它挑得很厉害。
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Taiwan's Lin Yuting has struck gold at the IBA Women's World Boxing Championship in Istanbul. In the featherweight division final, Lin beat Irma Testa of Italy in a split decision over 3 rounds. This is Lin's second World Championship title. She won her first at bantamweight in 2018. She also has 2 Asian Championship golds to her name. 2 hunters have admitted to killing an endangered Formosan black bear in the mountains of Nantou in central Taiwan. Local officials say the suspects turned themselves in last Thursday. They have been charged with violating the Wildlife Conservation Act and released on bail. Police also confiscated a homemade firearm and ammunition. Earlier this month, the Forestry Bureau sent out a search team after losing the signal from the bear's satellite tracking collar. They found its body buried in a wooded area with the collar removed. The Formosan black bear is an endangered species and protected under Taiwanese law. Conservationists believe as few as 200 of the bears remain in the wild. One of Taiwan's largest annual religious processions kicked off in the early hours of Friday morning. The crowds were not deterred by Taiwan's biggest COVID outbreak to date. A record-breaking 90,000 people signed up to take part in this year's Baishatun Mazu pilgrimage, honouring the sea goddess Mazu. Participants had to be triple vaccinated to register. Some 6,000 vehicles are involved in the procession, about triple last year's figure, forming a train up to 50 kilometres long. The participants will travel on a 400-kilometre round trip from Miaoli County in northern Taiwan to the central county of Yunlin. The pilgrimage will take 8 days in total. At most elementary schools, the appearance of a beehive would be a cause for alarm. But one school in Taipei City is welcoming them with bee hotels. They aim to teach children about one of the hardest working creatures on the planet. In the run-up to World Bee Day on May 20th, our reporter Bing Wang went to see what all the buzz was about.
Biology teacher Deng Cuncun quizzes her students on bees. Deng has always had an affinity for bees, so much so that she built several bee hotels at this school where she teaches, Zinan Elementary. These bee hotels are created by an urban beekeeping organization called Come Back to Me, which started in 2016. Their goal is to build bee-friendly environments across Taiwan. Fu Sangrui is one of the co-founders of Come Back to Me. An entomologist by trade, he says it's important to keep bees safe.
所以其实这些不管是独居蜂类，还是蜜蜂，或是虎头蜂，还有甚至雄蜂这些社会性的蜂类，还是独居蜂类，他们在生态系中都扮演一个很重要的角色，就是授粉者。种类因为非常的多，所以它能授粉的植物种类就相对来说也会很多。
But Fu says the bee population is dwindling.
他们同样会受到这些环境的变迁、气候的变迁，然后农药使用的影响。可是，在过去我们根本没有注意到这些蜂类，我们也不会花那么多的力气去帮助他们。
Now, Fu and his partners are doing their best to cultivate not just the bees, but also the next generation of bee lovers. Here at Zinan Elementary in Taipei, the school has built these bee hotels where the insects can eat, lay eggs, and eat. Biology teacher Deng Cunsun tells me that she puts the students in charge of the bees themselves.
以小朋友来讲，就是他们现在其实看3C，他们要看电影、电视，或者是他们看 Discovery 什么东西，要看到那些生态影片太容易了。可是我觉得那看起来其实是没有什么感觉，是无感的。
And with the school situated on a mountain surrounded by trees, it's the perfect place for students to connect with nature.
第一个他们长得很可爱，第二个就是因为看他们 的活动很有趣。
喜欢，因为就是我们一开始观察的时候还觉得它有点可怕，因为它飞来飞去的时候声音也很大声，但后来发现它其实就是在潮室里面的活动，然后或者是说什么它的样子都很新奇，然后每次看的时候都觉得很好玩。
While some may be scared of being stung by bees, Zinan Elementary is ensuring that these insects will be taken care of, and they, in turn, will ensure the survival of the plants in our world. Chris Ma, Peachy Zhuang, and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
Tattoos in Taiwan were once considered taboo by many due to their association with local gangs. But they have a long history here, especially among the indigenous population. We travel to the southern city of Kaohsiung to meet an artist who is helping to bring body art into the mainstream.
我叫刁青，然后我今年39岁。我从事刺青20岁到现在差不多20年。第一次我就拿了美工刀，用割的，然后沾那个原子笔的色料，割，有稍微成功了。当时我的父亲就气得要把我那个皮要割掉，因为在那个年代那个时期，也有可能是我年纪还太小，所以家长会产生比较负面的一种观点来去看我那个行为，我那第一次接触，到后面因为想要挑战，为什么有些人他的图很漂亮，那我能不能办到？就因为这样子一路一直摸到现在。上色的困难度就是在于那个渐层跟均匀度。我们在纸上画。墨水的扩散是顺着纸张材质不同的扩散速度，但是在皮层上它不会扩散。你在刺的时候，它不是扩散的方式，所以你会仔细到去看到每一个出去的针头，那一个针头有没有去扎实的去排列，去点出颜色，让它制造出这些色块，去表达阴暗立体。所以我觉得所谓的帕布啦、上色啦，这一个环节会是比较耗费心力。我摸索到差不多第10年，我才大概领悟了怎么上颜色。所以你看，在这个空间里面，我们要去不断的去重复温习所谓的素描，这个是基础。在出国展览这一块，我们要跟客人约时间，完成好这个作品。完成好之后呢，再去设定说，我要去哪一国城市去参加这个刺青的一个艺术展示。那我们这个东西是没有补助的啦，所以都必须要自己抽时间，自己酝酿金钱金额。然后来去报名。我个人的体会啦，我可以在这个过程去看到我自己不足的地方，那我不足的地方怎么去修缮，或别人的长才、别的国家的文化风格，你可以去吸收到这些东西。我觉得在内心的部分，它会去培养你自己对于你自己的一个认知跟认定。我觉得出国的。或者是参展，在国内参展也好，在国外参展也好，你只要有用心去感受，你绝对能够获得提升。
There's a new fine dining experience that you can catch rolling through Taiwan's countryside. It brings together the country's iconic railways and culinary arts. Our partners at Radio Taiwan International have the story.
With soft, dim lighting and exquisite tableware, you could mistake this space for an upmarket restaurant. Well, diners better take their seats because this restaurant is about to get moving. The 5-star restaurant on wheels is a part of a tourist train called Mingrihao, or Future in English. After 1 year in the making, its dining experience, called The Kitchen, was unveiled to the public. Diners can enjoy Michelin-grade delicacies supervised by Chef Tsai Ming-ze from Taipei's Regent Hotel while admiring Taiwan's picturesque countryside scenery. Besides a dedicated car for preparing food, passengers will have at their disposal a business class car, a lounge, and a bar. Creating a 5-star dining experience on a train is no mean feat. Access to water and electricity is limited, while the risk of spilling a drink on a guest is high. That's why everything from equipment to service and menu has been carefully tested ahead of time. Chef Tsai from the Regent Hotel says that the entire process starts 3 or 4 days before plating, while only finishing touches are applied on board the train. Taiwan Railways Administration head Du Wei says that the train began operations at the end of 2020, and even though it was mothballed for 3 months last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it still completed 58 trips and generated 140 million NT dollars or $5 million US in revenue. He says Taiwan Railways will continue expanding its tourist services, including trains designed especially for cyclists. The kitchen will initially carry passengers on 1 or 2 day trips along Taiwan's east coast, serving up specialties like the Dongsan cherry duck and abalones from Gongliao. If any of this has whet your appetite, well, you might need to wait. The trips are booked solid until the end of June, but if you're willing to foot the bill, then it's all aboard and bon appetit.
Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Finally today, we leave you with images of the 3rd Taipei Dangdai Art Fair, this year featuring 62 leading international and Taiwanese galleries, displaying 1,000 artworks by 200 artists. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the Taiwan Plus app. Stay safe and see you next time.